is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time?
There are a number of different things that you could do early pertaining to executive orders.
Right.
One of them is to shut down Guantanamo Bay.
Mm-hmm. I have said repeatedly that I intend to close Guantanamo, and I will follow through on that.
Well, it's pretty clear. All President-elect Obama needs to do is to sign an executive order. It doesn't require a legislative package. It doesn't require hearings. It doesn't require bipartisan horse trading. It requires the political will to follow through soon on a promise made on the campaign trail.
You know, I think when people think about Guantanamo, they think about, you know, a place, a prison, a series of buildings on an island. Really, Guantanamo is this alternative legal system that the Bush administration came up with almost overnight.
What you do now with the 255 men or so being held in Guantanamo, you have to figure out whether or not you can hold them to charge them. If you can't charge them, you have to release them. For those that we have already filed, 17 or 18 of them we have filed charges against, now we need to move them to a real court of law. They either have to go into criminal courts, just like some of the cases that have been dealt with in the criminal courts, the case of Zacarias Moussaoui or Jose Padilla, or if we still have questions about whether or not they're prisoners of war and whether or not they're entitled to the protections as prisoners of war under the Geneva Conventions, we can move them to the Uniform Code of Military Justice tribunals. There are military commissions.
He has talked about federal trials. Now, you know, the legal community is divided over whether that can work. And really, I think one of the reasons the legal community is divided is because there are 250 detainees at Gitmo. There are 250 different cases. You know, some of those guys, there's no evidence at all against them. Some of them, the evidence is tainted because it was extracted, it was gleaned through abuse or torture.
There's evidence they probably can't use, evidence garnered under torture, under waterboarding, evidence that hasn't been corroborated, evidence from unnamed sources, evidence that's coerced or hearsay evidence. That evidence you can't use in a court of law.
You know, I think one of the first things that President Obama will have to do is get a team together to scour through all that evidence for these 250 people and divide them up into groups. Who among those 250 can be put on trial in a federal court with enough evidence, with usable evidence? Who can't be put on trial? Who has to be sent home quickly? And then subdivide those into smaller groups and begin working in that way. There are two categories to talk about in repatriation. There are the people who want to go back home, and the negotiation for that has been the most difficult with the Yemenis, and that's why we have so many Yemenis still at Guantanamo. A lot of those guys are guys who could go home tomorrow, even as far as the Pentagon is concerned. The other category are people who have said, detainees who have said, I don't want to go back home because if I do, I'm going to face either imprisonment or abuse or torture. The famous group is the Uyghurs. These are people who would go home to China.
The questions about whether or not the Uyghurs can be repatriated to China sure raises a complicated question. But you don't get to hold them in jail just because the Chinese won't take them back. You can't hold these individuals indefinitely. It has to be a reasonable period of time. And if you can't repatriate them, and you can't find them to go to a third country, they got to be let out.
The way I understand it, the State Department has approached 100 countries. One country said yes. Albania did. They took a handful of Uyghurs. No country has any interest in taking someone who's been imprisoned at Guantanamo. And often the response of our allies, countries like Canada, Australia, European countries, is, well, why don't you take them? I think that there's a greater amount of goodwill internationally towards Obama than there was towards Bush. So there is probably a greater willingness going forward for some third countries to accept these Gitmo detainees who can't be repatriated to their home countries. But I think the condition will be, as you say, some of them have to be repatriated or patriated to the United States.